Joining us now, former advisor to John McCain and George Bush, Mark McKinnon, and Democratic pollster and MSNBC political analyst Fernand Amandi. Guys, there's obviously so much anticipation for Thursday, but these men have debated before. Mark, both men have already been president, so the voters know their records. Given that, how much does this debate matter?
That's a great point, but the reality is it's a huge debate. It's hard for me to think of any presidential debate that could be as consequential as this one. Your point is right. Voters know about these guys. There's nothing that Trump's going to say about Biden or Biden's going to say about Trump that they don't know. They know their records. They know what they're like. This is really much more of a competency test than a debate. The question that voters on both sides have about each candidate is, they're 80 years old. They're old. They know that. The question is, are they up to the job? Can they stand on the stage for 90 minutes without a net, without advisors, without a teleprompter? And can they be alert? Can they stay focused? And can Trump not lose his temper? That's going to be the key, is just to see whether or not these guys are up to the job.
Fernand, who do you think has more at stake in this debate?
Oh, Anna, there's no question for me, President Trump is the one with the most riding on the line here, because unfortunately, the idea of preparing for two different Trumps in the debate is not a realistic one. There's only one Trump. It is the over-the-top, insulting, narcissistic, easily offended guy. That's the guy who's going to be on stage. The idea that Trump might be disciplined or focused, I've never seen that person in the last 8+ years. So I think for him, it really is an opportunity to do some real harm to the candidacy. I think Mark is right. There is a tremendous amount riding on this debate. And you look at, for President Biden, it's a chance to get his supporters and the Democratic base really re-engaged. If he has a strong performance like he did at the State of the Union, I think that's going to have a shot of huge adrenaline into Team Biden in the campaign, get people excited about the prospect, overcome any concerns about age. If he performs like the commander-in-chief that he's shown he can be on the global stage, whether it's at the G7 or other important settings, I think he will do just fine. And frankly, the Trump campaign has so bungled the expectations game, Anna, where short of a massive senior moment or a physical collapse for President Biden on stage, he's going to walk off the winner.
And yet, Mark, I know you have written in a new piece in Vanity Fair about the stakes for President Biden, and it's titled here, How Biden Can Flip His Fortunes or Flop. You say the president needs to really pick 2 or 3 issues and that you think Trump will unravel. What issues would make that happen?
Well, listen, I think this is 90% psychology. Incumbent presidents hate to debate. It was the case for President Bush when I worked with him in 2004. I've talked to David Axelrod about Obama's first debate. You've got to get their head in the right space. And the key for Biden is just going to be calm, to stay alert, but then to just poke at Trump. He's not going to win a policy debate. He's not going to win an argument with Trump. But what he can do is get into Trump psychology. What Trump hates more than anything is being framed as a loser. And Biden has a lot of evidence to make that case. Take jobs, for instance. I mean, Trump came in and had he left with fewer jobs than when he started. He has like a worse jobs record than Hoover from 100 years ago. He was the first presidential candidate to lose not only the presidency, but the House and the Senate. Just frame him as a loser. That gets to Trump's psychology. That's what's going to make him unravel. Some policy debate and nuances are not going to, that's not what's going to make Trump come undone. Get into his headspace.
I think people are wondering how much drama will this debate end up having. The New York Times spoke to, quote, voters watching the debate with a hand over their eyes. One voter telling the Times that this debate, quote, has all the makings of a train wreck with chemical spillage that is lethally toxic. Another saying that, quote, this is the most apprehensive he's felt about a presidential debate, adding, I sense a disaster in the making where neither will look presidential. Fernand, what does that tell you about the state of American politics, that this is what the public is feeling about the 2 men on the ticket?
Well, look, I mean, I think the American public is right. There are some legitimate concerns with President Biden. I think the age question is a legitimate one. He would be the oldest president ever reelected. With Trump, the concerns are about someone who has said in word and in deed, Anna, that he plans to be a day one dictator and, in essence, end the American experiment in democracy. So I think those 2 things are going to be on display. One card, however, that I think we need to be mindful of, I anticipate Donald Trump's going to have a really bad night. But Anna, one thing that I think they're going to do is perhaps even to try and change the conversation, announce the vice presidential pick as early as the next morning. Trump has already said that vice presidential selection will be at the debate. I think they may just go ahead and announce it the next morning to try and flood the zone, change the conversation. If Trump performs as badly as he historically does when it comes to these serious debates where he has an opportunity to take the higher ground and never does.
Fernand Amandi really lowering expectations for Donald Trump's debate performance. And thank you for joining us. Mark McKinnon, great to have you with us as well. Thank you both so much.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.